It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. After a decade of marriage, Elon and I decided it was time to celebrate our anniversary in a way we never had before. We'd both been so caught up in our careers, me in my work as a graphic designer, and him with his ever-demanding job in finance, that time just seemed to slip away from us. Our anniversary felt like the perfect excuse to reconnect, to remind ourselves of the love that had brought us together in the first place. We rented a beautiful villa nestled on the outskirts of a picturesque town, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The villa was huge, with expansive grounds, a shimmering pool, and enough rooms to accommodate a small crowd. And that's precisely what we planned to do, celebrate not just with each other but with our closest friends and family. Our parents were thrilled with the idea. My mother, Margaret, and father, David, had been eagerly counting down the days to this vacation. Elon's parents, Jason and Linda, were equally excited. We also invited a few close friends, some of whom had known us since before we were married. The thought of everyone coming together, away from all the stresses of life, filled me with anticipation. On the day of our arrival, the weather was perfect, sunny with just a hint of a breeze. We pulled up to the villa in a convoy of cars, everyone in high spirits. I remember feeling a wave of happiness wash over me as I stepped out of the car and looked at the villa for the first time. It was more beautiful than in the pictures, an old-world charm with modern comforts. It felt like we had found a slice of paradise. As we unpacked our bags, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. It wasn't the first time we had organized a family event, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the pressure of making our 10th anniversary memorable, or perhaps it was the fear of everything going too perfectly. I pushed the thought aside, deciding to focus on the positive vibes. Everyone settled into their rooms quickly. The villa was spacious enough that everyone had their own space, with each room offering stunning views of the surrounding countryside. I was particularly fond of the room Elon and I had chosen, an airy suite with a private balcony overlooking the pool. The decor was a mix of rustic and modern, with wooden beams across the ceiling and crisp white linens on the bed. It felt both cozy and luxurious. Elon and I had planned a small celebration for the evening, nothing too extravagant, just a casual get-together with good food, some drinks, and lots of laughter. As the day wore on, everyone dispersed, either exploring the villa or relaxing in their rooms. I decided to take a quick nap before getting ready for the evening. When I woke up, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. I stretched lazily, feeling completely relaxed. That was when I realized I still hadn't changed into the dress I had picked out for the evening. I had left it hanging in the closet, a simple yet elegant outfit that I knew Elon loved. As I headed towards the closet, I noticed that the door to our room was slightly ajar. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but I didn't think much of it. With so many people in the villa, it was easy to imagine someone had popped their head in, maybe looking for something. I pushed the door open, intending to close it behind me, but stopped in my tracks when I saw someone lying on our bed. At first, I thought it was Elon, but as I moved closer, I realized it was Jason, Elon's father. He was lying on his back, eyes closed, with one arm draped across his forehead. He looked completely at ease, as if he belonged there. My immediate reaction was one of confusion. Why was he in our room? Jason? I called out softly, not wanting to startle him. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he just stared at me, as if trying to place where he was. Then he sat up abruptly, looking around the room with a confused expression. "Jane," he said, sounding just as surprised as I felt. I must have walked into the wrong room. I thought this was mine. I couldn't help but smile at the situation. The villa was a maze of similar-looking rooms and hallways. It was easy to see how someone could get turned around. "It's okay," I said, walking over to the closet to retrieve my dress. "You must have been really tired." He chuckled, running a hand through his graying hair. "Yeah, I guess so. This place is like a labyrinth." There was a brief silence as I pulled my dress out of the closet. I was about to suggest he head back to his room when I noticed he was still sitting there, looking at me with a strange expression, one I couldn't quite read. It wasn't uncomfortable, just different. I'd known Jason for years, and we'd always gotten along well, but this felt like something else. Before I could say anything, Jason spoke up. "You know, Jane, you've done a wonderful job with this whole anniversary thing. Elon's lucky to have you. His words caught me off guard. Jason wasn't usually one for compliments, especially not out of the blue like this. I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. Thank you, Jason. That means a lot. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. It's true. Not everyone can keep things together the way you do. There was something in his tone, something that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just the words, but the way he said them, like there was more he wanted to say but couldn't. I suddenly felt a little self-conscious standing there with my dress in hand. I should probably get changed, I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. Jason nodded, but he didn't move. Instead, he stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Of course. I'll just get out of your way. As he walked past me, something unexpected happened. He paused, just for a second, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. And then, before I could react, he leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. It was the briefest of kisses, innocent enough on the surface, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the kind of kiss you'd expect from your father-in-law, even in a moment of gratitude. There was something else behind it, something that made my pulse quicken. He pulled back almost immediately, looking as surprised as I felt. I'm sorry, he said quickly, his voice tight. I didn't mean to. I should go. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing there, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't understand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to shake off the strange encounter with Jason, telling myself it was nothing more than an innocent mistake, a moment of confusion that meant nothing. But the memory of that kiss, of the look in his eyes, kept playing in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. When I finally joined everyone downstairs, the villa was buzzing with activity. Elon was in the kitchen, laughing with my father over a bottle of wine, while my mother was deep in conversation with Linda about the garden. Our friends were scattered around, some lounging by the pool, others setting up the music for the evening. It was exactly the kind of relaxed, joyful atmosphere I'd hoped for. But I couldn't fully immerse myself in it. My thoughts kept drifting back to Jason, to the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd touched me. I found myself glancing around, searching for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. Elon, have you seen your dad? I asked, trying to sound casual as I joined him at the kitchen counter. He looked up from pouring a glass of wine, his brow furrowing slightly. He was here a minute ago. Probably went to his room to freshen up. Why? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the uneasy feeling in my stomach. No reason, just haven't seen him around. Elon smiled, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. He'll turn up. Probably just getting lost in this maze like the rest of us. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something that had nothing to do with getting lost in the villa. As the night wore on, I found myself avoiding Jason, even though I wasn't sure why. Every time I heard his voice or caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of my eye, my heart would start to race again. It was like my body was reacting to something my mind didn't fully understand. But avoiding him only made things worse. Every time our eyes met across the room, I felt a strange tension building between us, something electric and undeniable. It was the kind of tension that made me feel both excited and terrified, like standing on the edge of a cliff and wondering what would happen if I jumped. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, Jason was my father-in-law, and I was married to his son. There was nothing to worry about. But deep down, I knew that something had changed, something that I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. It was late by the time the party started winding down. Most of our guests had gone to bed, and the villa was finally quiet. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but I couldn't sleep. The events of the day kept replaying in my mind, over and over again. Elon was already in bed, fast asleep, when I finally decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head, to shake off the lingering tension that had settled in my chest like a heavy weight. I slipped out of the room quietly, careful not to wake him, and made my way down the darkened hallway. The villa was eerily silent, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind outside. As I walked, I found myself drawn to the room where Jason was staying. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't stop myself. Something was pulling me towards him, something I couldn't explain. When I reached his door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew I should turn around, go back to my room, and forget about everything that had happened. But before I could make a decision, the door opened, and Jason was standing there, looking just as surprised to see me as I was to be there. "Jane," he said quietly, his voice full of something I couldn't quite identify. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say, how to explain why I was standing outside his room in the middle of the night. But I didn't have to say anything. Jason seemed to understand, his expression softening as he stepped aside to let me in. For a moment, I stood frozen, torn between what I knew was right and what I wanted. But then I walked into the room, and everything changed. Jason closed the door behind us, and the room was bathed in a soft, muted light from a bedside lamp. I stood there, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity, as Jason moved to the center of the room and gestured for me to sit on the edge of the bed. I hesitated before taking a seat, my heart pounding. "Jane, I didn't expect to see you," Jason said, his voice carrying a note of vulnerability. He was standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets. "I know this must seem strange." I nodded, unable to find my voice. The words I wanted to say were tangled in a web of confusion and uncertainty. The kiss from earlier was still fresh in my mind, and I wasn't sure if confronting it now was the right thing to do. Jason took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to say something important. "I need to apologize for earlier," he began. "I didn't mean to cross any boundaries. It was a moment of weakness, or perhaps a lapse in judgment." The sincerity in his tone made my heart ache. I could see that he was genuinely remorseful, but the weight of his actions lingered between us like an unsaid confession. "It's okay," I managed to say, though it was anything but. "It was just unexpected." He looked at me with a mix of regret and something else, something that hinted at deeper feelings. "I've always admired you, Jane. Not just as Elon's wife, but as a person. Over the years, I've come to see you as more than just family. That's what makes this so difficult." My breath caught in my throat. I had suspected that something more might be behind Jason's behavior, but hearing it spoken aloud was a different matter entirely. It was clear now that this wasn't a simple mistake or a fleeting moment. There was a real connection, one that neither of us had anticipated. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Jason continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I value my family too much to let my personal feelings interfere. But I couldn't ignore what I was feeling any longer." A lump formed in my throat. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. I had always found Jason to be kind and supportive, but this was crossing into a territory I wasn't sure how to navigate. Part of me wanted to run from the room, to pretend this conversation had never happened. But another part of me was curious, longing to understand the depth of Jason's feelings. "What do you want to do now?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Jason looked pained. "I don't want to complicate things between us. I've always respected you, and I don't want to ruin that. I think it's best if we both just take a step back and process this on our own." I nodded, understanding the need for space and reflection. It was clear that neither of us could continue as if nothing had happened. The feelings Jason had expressed couldn't be ignored, and they needed to be addressed thoughtfully. "I agree," I said softly. "Maybe it's best if we just leave things as they are for now." Jason nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you for understanding. I truly didn't want to make things difficult for you." We sat there in silence for a few moments, the weight of our conversation hanging heavily in the air. I could see that Jason was deeply troubled by what had transpired, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. This was a situation no one could have anticipated, and it was clear that we both needed time to come to terms with it. Eventually, I stood up, feeling the need to leave the room before my emotions became too overwhelming. Jason stood as well, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolution. "I should go," I said quietly. "It's been a long day, and I think we both need some rest." Jason nodded, his expression a blend of regret and understanding. "Yes, Of course. Thank you for coming to talk. As I opened the door to leave, I turned back one last time. Let's just try to enjoy the rest of the trip, okay? We can deal with this when we're back home. Jason gave me a small, sad smile. Agreed. We'll figure it out. With that, I stepped out of the room and made my way back to my own quarters. The villa was still quiet, the night air cool and soothing as I walked. I felt a sense of relief mixed with lingering unease. The conversation with Jason had been necessary, but it had also opened a door to emotions and questions that I wasn't sure how to handle. When I finally reached my room, I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. Elon was still asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. I stood by the bed for a moment, watching him with a mixture of love and sadness. Despite the turmoil of the evening, I was grateful for his presence. He was my rock, the person who had been by my side through thick and thin. I lay down beside him, trying to push aside the thoughts that plagued my mind. The day had started with such promise, and now it felt as though everything was shifting beneath my feet. The villa, once a haven of celebration and joy, had become a backdrop for complex emotions and unspoken truths. As I closed my eyes, I hoped that tomorrow would bring clarity and a chance to start anew. For now, I needed to focus on the present and the love I shared with Elon. No matter what happened next, I knew that I had to stay true to myself and the commitments I had made. The villa, with its quiet rooms and gentle breeze, seemed to offer a sense of solace as I drifted off to sleep. But even as I closed my eyes, I knew that the events of the night had set in motion a series of conversations and decisions that would shape the days to come. Morning came all too quickly. I awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the window and the soft rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains. I stretched, feeling the weight of the previous night still lingering in my thoughts. Elon was still asleep beside me, his arm draped across my waist. I carefully disentangled myself from his embrace and got up, deciding that a walk might help clear my mind. I slipped into a light robe and quietly made my way outside. The villa grounds were serene, the early morning light casting a gentle glow over the lush gardens and the sparkling pool. I wandered around, taking in the beauty of the surroundings, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation with Jason. I was lost in thought when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Elon approaching, a concerned expression on his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but with a hint of worry. "I didn't know you were up." "Good morning," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "I just needed some fresh air." Elon came closer and took my hand, his gaze searching mine. "Is everything okay? You seem distracted." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's just been a lot to take in. Last night was different." Elon's brow furrowed. "Different how?" I took a deep breath, weighing whether to tell him about the encounter with Jason. I knew it was important to be honest, but I also didn't want to cause unnecessary worry. "It's just that, things didn't go exactly as planned. There were some unexpected moments." Elon nodded, sensing that there was more I wasn't saying. "I understand. If you need to talk about it, I'm here for you." I appreciated his offer, but I wasn't ready to delve into the details just yet. "Thank you. I just need a bit more time to process everything." Elon squeezed my hand gently. "Take all the time you need. Let's try to enjoy the day. Maybe we can plan a nice outing or something. It might help take your mind off things." I smiled, grateful for his understanding. "That sounds like a good idea. Let's make the most of the day." We spent the morning enjoying the villa's amenities, swimming in the pool, lounging in the sun, and sharing a relaxed brunch with the others. The conversations were light and cheerful, and for a while, I was able to push aside the lingering unease. But as the day wore on, I couldn't escape the reality of the situation. The tension between Jason and me was still palpable, and I found myself avoiding him as much as possible. Whenever our paths crossed, there was an unspoken understanding that something was off, but neither of us knew how to address it without further complicating things. As evening approached, I decided to take another walk to clear my mind. The villa grounds were quiet, and the sunset cast a warm, golden hue over the landscape. I walked aimlessly, trying to escape the swirling thoughts in my head. That's when I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see Jason standing a few feet away, his expression guarded but earnest. "Jane," he said softly, "can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. But I knew that avoiding the conversation would only make things more difficult. I nodded and gestured for him to follow me to a secluded spot near the edge of the property. We sat on a stone bench, the sound of crickets filling the silence. Jason looked out at the view, his face reflecting a mix of contemplation and regret. "I wanted to apologize again," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I've already said it, but I need you to know how truly sorry I am. I never intended for any of this to happen." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. "I appreciate your apology, Jason. It's complicated." He nodded, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "I understand. And I want you to know that I respect whatever boundaries you need to set. I don't want to create more problems." I could see that Jason was struggling with his feelings, and it made me question my own. The connection we had shared was undeniable, but it was also fraught with complications. I needed to decide what was best for myself and for my marriage. "I think we both need some space to figure things out," I said finally. "It's important that we don't let this affect the people we care about." Jason nodded, a look of relief mingled with sadness in his eyes. "I agree. Let's focus on making the rest of this trip enjoyable and then deal with things when we get back home." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation settling over us. It was clear that we both needed time to process what had happened and to figure out how to move forward. Eventually, I stood up, signaling that it was time to return to the villa. "Thank you for understanding," I said softly. "Let's try to make the most of the time we have left here." Jason nodded, standing up as well. "Yes, let's do that." We walked back to the villa together, the conversation having brought a sense of closure to the previous night's events. It was clear that there were still unresolved feelings and questions, but for now, we had agreed to focus on enjoying the remainder of our trip. As the days went by, the tension between Jason and me slowly began to ease. We kept our interactions cordial but respectful, avoiding any further discussions about the previous night. The villa's atmosphere became more relaxed as we all worked to make the most of the vacation. Elon and I enjoyed our time together, making new memories and reconnecting as a couple. The villa, with its tranquil surroundings and beautiful vistas, provided a perfect backdrop for reflection and rejuvenation. Despite the challenges we had faced, the trip ultimately allowed us to strengthen our bond and appreciate the love we shared. By the time we packed up to head home, I felt a sense of relief mixed with anticipation. The events of the trip had taught me the importance of honesty, boundaries, and the need to address difficult emotions with clarity and understanding. It was a reminder that even the most perfect getaways could be filled with unexpected challenges, but it was how we faced those challenges that truly mattered. As we drove away from the villa, I glanced back at the picturesque landscape one last time. The memories of our time there would remain with me, both the joyful moments and the difficult ones. But as we returned to our everyday lives, I felt hopeful that we could move forward with renewed strength and a deeper appreciation for the love and connection we shared. The journey was far from over, but I knew that whatever lay ahead, I was ready to face it with courage and honesty.